In this class we're going to look at types of research. Let's start with looking at quantitative research and the quantitative approach to research. So it looks at data in a quantitative format. It looks at essentially numbers. It looks at percentages, it looks at quantities. And it may employ sophisticated statistical methods to analyze the data, perhaps specialist computer programs or particular techniques which are sophisticated in order to get a greater understanding of what the data is saying. So it's a very formalized approach to research. It takes the data and it analyzes it in a very formal fashion. And generally speaking, that is the quantitative approach to research. It may include techniques like regression analysis and correlation analysis and techniques that economists sometimes refer to as econometric techniques, looking at very advanced statistical tests and statistical analysis to make sense of the data. There's also what's known as an inferential approach. Now the inferential approach, this attempts to infer or discover characteristics of the population. The process is straightforward. Sample the population and analyze the data collected. Draw likely outcomes for the population. So look at a sample, try to work out the properties of the sample, the characteristics of the sample, and then infer from that what are the likely characteristics of the whole population. And that is the inferential approach. So it's trying to infer, let's say, what the average is from a sample. Having selected a sample, if it's selected properly, perhaps using random sampling, then if the sample has an average of 10, then is it likely that the whole population will have an average of 10? Or what will the average of the population be? Will it be 10 plus or minus a certain percentage? That's the inferential approach. There's also an experimental approach. This is widely used in the natural sciences, so it's not so much applicable in the context of business as in our case. Experiments are usually involve controlling some variables and then trying to work out the relationship between the remaining limited set of variables. So scientists use this a lot to try to control certain variables, hold situations constant, and then allow a couple of variables to move and see what the relationship between them is. It's what's used in, as I said, the natural sciences and the approach of the natural sciences. Assume we want to investigate the relationship between temperature and pressure for a gas, for example. We would need the following apparatus. We'd need a source of heat, because we're going to look at different temperatures. We'd need a closed container of gas of a known volume, so we'd have to have a volume of gas, and we'd have to have a gauge to measure the temperature. And we should find that as the temperature rises, so also does the pressure, providing that the volume of the container remains constant. This you'll recognize as Boyle's law in physics. But note here, the container's volume remains constant. So the experimental approach is to hold some aspects constant and vary others and see what the relationship is. We can't use it in business a lot because we're dealing with, let's say, customers. Well, we can't assume that the customers are going to keep their incomes constant just because we want to find out the relationship between the price and the quantity sold. Or we can't say that they're going to buy the same amount irrespective of the price. People are not like that. So it's easier in a sense in the natural sciences to control variables, to work out relationships, as in the example I've just given of Boyle's law. There's also what's known as a simulation approach. Sometimes we want to know the likely outcomes from changes, but do not want to incur the cost of doing it in practice. Sometimes we want to try and work out what's likely to happen, but we don't want to go through the cost and all of the problems of doing it in practice. So we simulate it. We try to simulate. There's various ways of doing this. We could role play it, for example, or we could have a simulation exercise. And nowadays computers are more and more sophisticated, and they're able to simulate situations as well. It may be possible to simulate the situation and try to determine the likely outcomes. This may involve the use of specialized computer programs and use random numbers to generate various scenarios. So computers are pretty good at helping with this type of approach. Then we've got the qualitative approach. This is concerned with the subjective assessment of attitudes, opinions and behaviors. It's qualitative. It's looking at the subjective, the opinions of respondents. It's looking at their attitudes and their opinions and their behavior. Some of the techniques used in this type of approach are, for example, focus groups, looking at the opinions of people and getting them into focus groups and questioning them and seeing what comes out of interactions within focus groups. We could pick up opinions by just interviewing them, and there are various sampling approaches. For example, snowball sampling, where you ask a friend his or her opinions about something, and you ask a friend to recommend some of his or her friends, and you go to them and ask their opinions and ask them for a list of their friends and ask them to recommend you, and you go and see those. So it's snowballing. Your friend, and then your friend's friends, then your friend's friend's friends, and so on. So it's a snowball exercise. But it's qualitative. It's not pretending to be scientific, and it's not pretending to be a major contributor of what is a contributor of knowledge, perhaps. But what it is it's an insight. It may be biased, but at least it is an insight into people's opinions and their attitudes, and some useful material may come out of the whole exercise. The qualitative approach is to look at opinions and attitudes and to pick up these in whatever format is most suitable. Now, these are some fundamental approaches to research, some very important big approaches to research, so I think this particular session is useful. That's all I'm going to do at the moment. I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.